Alright guys, welcome back to the video. Today we back here with another Lindsay Nicole video. I don't know, I just been really into these animal videos lately and stuff about that, area. So yeah, let's see what she's talking about today.
50,000 years ago, a small species of human lived in a cave tucked away on the island of Flores in Indonesia. They were 3 feet tall and seemed to live a much more primitive lifestyle than other human species alive at the time. They're called Homo floresiensis, also known as the Hobbit people. The Hobbit people had a strange mix of characteristics that made them vastly different from other human species, and their environment was equally as alien from the rest of the world. Although only bits of evidence have been found of their existence, and many aspects of their life are still a mystery, their fossils have led to massive debates on their origins. Today we'll be exploring them, specifically where they came from, how they got so small, and if they are possibly still alive. As always, we're going to get the general information out of the way, this time by looking at the hominin family tree, which shows the major groups of hominins that have emerged since about 7 million years ago. That upper group in the tree represents the genus Homo, humans. This includes us, of course, Homo floresiensis, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, which we are thought to have evolved from, and a handful of other human species that were different from our own, many of which at some point existed at the same time as us. At the time that both modern humans and Homo floresiensis were alive, I want to say there were like 5 other human species hanging out in different parts of the world, which is pretty nuts, some of which interacted with each other. Each species had their own unique environment to adapt to, and so had their own distinct set of traits. Homo floresiensis is arguably the most unique though, and so come with a lot of questions. If you're even slightly familiar with the study of evolution, you know that shit is complete pandemonium. I spent hours going back and forth on what to include in the general information topic because it's really easy to go on tangents about how complicated this shit is. So to keep it simple, I'm gonna stop there. I want to do more videos on human evolution in the future, so I will keep the ranting for that. In summary, Homo floresiensis represents just one branch in the complex hominin family tree that has existed for about 7 million years. All right, I think we're ready to get into it. Let's do a little bit of lore. Back in the 1950s, Dutch scientists decided to go to Flores to look for early human traces, which turned out to be successful trips. They found things like stone artifacts with remains of stegodon, an extinct relative to elephants. So they decided to continue excavations on different parts of the island. And in 1965, they went to a massive cave called Liangua, which translates to cool cave. Absolute fucking sick-ass cave. Liangua was a gold mine. Traces of Homo sapiens from the early and late Stone Age, the Metal Age. They found human skeletons, evidence of deliberate burials, pottery, artifacts, etc. Clearly, Liangua played a big role for early humans on the island, and excavations continued here for decades. So at this point, scientists from all over the world were interested in getting into this cave and finding some more cool human shit. not human shit. Cool fossil stuff. It was initially thought that the deeper layers that dated to like the meat of the Pleistocene were going to be culturally sterile. No evidence of humans, as modern humans hadn't arrived there yet, that they knew of. But New Zealand archaeologist Mike Morwood disagreed. And despite bitter shit talking from the Dutch, ended up taking over the excavation projects. And it's a good thing he did. On September 2nd, 2003, Mike's team hit the top of a very small skull while digging. They initially thought they found the remains of a modern human child, managed to uncover leg bones and some arm bones of the same individual, and once the skull was cleaned, they looked at the molars and realized this child had fully developed adult teeth.
Wait a minute!
That's not a kid. That's something else. The team kept this discovery hidden from the public for about a year to study it, figure out what the fuck they got going on. And in 2004, they published their findings. A new small-bodied hominin from the late Pleistocene of Flores, Indonesia. They named it Homo floresiensis, and it gagged the scientific community and even hit regular news networks. So it essentially went viral. So what were these traits that made Homo floresiensis such a big deal? Yes, they were small, and that was a big part of it. Fossil remains of multiple individuals that were found were on average about 1 meter tall, which is like the size of a modern human 5-year-old, just little guys. But that's not all. They also had a really unusual mix of more primitive and modern traits. They were bipedal, walked on 2 feet, like other species in the genus Homo, but they had more robust limb bones, longer arms, shorter legs, proportions similar to earlier hominins in the tree like Australopithecus, which our whole genus Homo is thought to have evolved from. Also, their feet were big. Their legs were short, and their feet were relatively long, which made their feet look even bigger. Big feet. Big foot.
Oh, shit.
But what was arguably most perplexing about them was how small their brains were. Their cranial capacity was just a fraction of that of other species in the genus. Let me put it into perspective real quick. Let's say this bush represents the genus Homo. We've got Neanderthals over here, all right? They had an average cranial capacity of 1,500 cubic centimeters. Us, let's put us right. Let's put us right here. Sapiens. We have an average cranial capacity of 1,400 cubic centimeters. Yeah, Neanderthals had us beat on that one. The more you know. And Homo erectus had a very long lifespan. They went from 700 cubic centimeters to 1,200 cubic centimeters in a time from 2 million to 500,000 years ago. Where did hobbits fall onto this scale? They had a cranial capacity of 417 cubic centimeters.
Dang.
What the fuck? That's closer to some of the earliest hominid species like Sahelanthropus chidensis that was like 350 cubic centimeters and were alive like 7 million years ago. Absolutely baffling for a species that was only alive 50,000 years ago. Erase. So even though the hobbits were originally classified as their own species in the genus Homo in the original paper, this became a huge debate. This mix of characteristics would suggest extremely drastic evolutionary changes over a relatively short period of time, with some traits seemingly going backwards in evolution, which is not the correct way to look at it. Things don't go backwards in evolution, but like it seemingly went backwards in evolution. So many scientists weren't convinced that these anatomical pipsqueaks represented their own species. Some argued that maybe these fossils represented modern humans that suffered from some sort of abnormal condition. Microcephaly was proposed, which literally translates to small head, cephaly, head, if you remember from the two-headed snakes video, which, by the way, I got a two-headed snake
They just found people from that species that had a problem.
Also thrown out there, but none of them totally made sense for the fossils and their proportions. There was also talk of maybe growth hormones being impacted by a lack of iodine in the environment, but nothing stuck because nothing completely fit as an explanation. Scientists who supported the new species idea held strong and argued that these seemingly unexplainable changes in their anatomy could be explained when you look at them in the context of their whole environment. That's right, bitches. Island rule. If you've never heard of island rule, you can kind of think of it as Mother Nature's way of saying fuck around and find out. Islands are where shit gets weird. In general, the smaller an island is, the weirder it gets, and the further it is from the mainland, the weirder it gets. That's the key.
Okay.
Flores just so happens to sit in an area called Wallacea, which is a group of islands that sit between Asia and Australia, and throughout geologic time have rarely or never been connected to the mainlands via land bridges. Land bridges happened with rising and falling sea levels during the ice ages, ice caps making shit melt, and led to a lot of different migration events, like the Bering Strait land bridge allowed humans to cross into North America. But land bridges never really existed in Wallacea. Obviously, the ocean in between, let's say, Asia and Flores is pretty significant barrier for migration that most species aren't really capable of crossing. So when it does happen, it's very rare, and then once they're there, they're stuck. They're done. Okay. They're isolated. There's no migration in around. This creates an environment that is drastically different than the one on the mainland. The resources are different, interactions with different species are different, maybe fewer or no predators, less competition, and the populations are genetically isolated. There's no migration in or out. So over generations, their evolution goes nuts. All of them. It's like the Wild West. Allow me to introduce you to a few of these evolutionary experiments the hobbits lived with. A giant stork called Leptotylos robustus. They got to about 6.5 feet tall, which was twice the size of a hobbit. That's fucking terrifying. Fossil evidence suggests they were able to fly, despite their size. So they were likely in direct competition with the hobbits for food, which would have sucked for the hobbits. Those odds suck. Dude, imagine if seagulls were twice your size. You would absolutely let them take your sandwich on the beach. There were also pygmy elephants that evolved from stegodon. They're estimated to have been about 650 pounds, which is very small for an elephant. Asian elephants are like over 6,000 pounds. So, little teeny. I've talked about a different pygmy elephant before in my cutest extinct animals video, the Sicilian pygmy elephant. They got really small over a relatively small number of generations. This has just happened a couple times with elephants and their relatives, and cut marks in the bones of dwarf stegodon suggest the hobbits ate them. Komodo dragons also lived and still live on the island of Flores. Obviously, they're very big and posed a real threat to those pint-sized hobbits. I mean, they were the length of 3 hobbits laying down, dude. That's a threat.
Dang.
That is a predator. There were also, and still are, giant rats. Some the size of rabbits. Many species of varying sizes that the hobbits ate. So clearly they lived in their own little world, with animals that interacted in different ways than usual, and thus created an ecosystem unlike any other on the planet. For them, adapting to these unique conditions meant changes in their energy requirements, which led to shifts in the way their bodies use energy over time. For some reason, well, actually multiple reasons, it was beneficial for the ancestors of the hobbits to become small, to shrink over time, including their brain capacity, which might not make sense right off the bat. Like, the brain is so useful, why would you want it to shrink and not work as well, theoretically? Okay, so obviously, in order for your body to function properly,
less energy use.
Energy that comes from food. You're on an island
because they ain't have enough energy.
Hitting that energy requirement might be tough. And nervous tissue, brain tissue, is extremely energetically expensive, uses a shit ton of energy. So if the new environment doesn't require that much brain power, maybe there are no predators that you have to look out for and other factors, it makes sense to reduce the energy cost by decreasing the amount of nervous tissue, i.e. brain gets smaller. No need expensive brain, making it seem like they returned to a more primitive condition, but they were actually just adapting to their unique environment. It really serves as a reminder that evolution has no goal. There's no end goal. The goal isn't to be the most intelligent or the most whatever. It's just to survive in the environment you exist in. And intelligence doesn't really have anything to do with that. Long story short, island ecosystems are weird as fuck. Weird shit happens, and Homo floresiensis is just an example of that. I actually got a lot of this information from this paper. It covered what island rule looked like for all the animals on Flores, went way more in detail than I did. I'll put the link in the description in case you want to check it out. It was a really cool read. They also included this short section on how they think each of the animals got to the island of Flores, what those migration events looked like. Since those animals that lived on Flores must have crossed the water barrier somehow, they proposed swimming for elephants and lizards, floating for tortoises, and rafting for rats and hominids. They also suggested tsunamis might have played a role too, which makes sense for that region. Okay, so who were the ancestors to Homo floresiensis? Where do they come from? This is still a huge debate. Everything's still a big debate. Because like I said, right now, there's only a handful of evidence of their existence in general, let alone they just spawned. So scientists are currently really basing it on the fossil evidence of the ancestral candidates. The most widely accepted idea right now is that they represent a dwarfed species of Homo erectus. Homo erectus was an insanely successful species. They were around for like 1.5 million years, and like I mentioned earlier, are considered the ancestors to Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, us, as well as other species in the genus Homo. They had a pretty large geographic range too. They migrated out of Africa, spread to Eurasia, and then into Indonesia, and existed there in modified forms until like 100,000 years ago. It seems most likely that one population somehow got to the island of Flores and got isolated there. The problem that scientists have pointed out with this specific idea is that so many aspects of Homo floresiensis are much more primitive than Homo erectus. The paper I just mentioned does support the Homo erectus origin idea, but as far as I can tell, it's still on shaky ground. Not everyone has reached that consensus yet. Some scientists think the step backward is too big of a jump for it to have started from Homo erectus, but it's still the most accepted explanation, because the other option is even more shaky, that Homo floresiensis evolved from a different Homo species, more primitive than Homo erectus, Homo habilis, handyman that was in Africa about 2 million years ago. Maybe they slowly left Africa with populations expanding and eventually reaching Flores. That would explain the more primitive features of the hobbits, but there is absolutely no evidence that Homo habilis ever left Africa that we know of. So where they came from is still a mystery. I'm trying to tell you, they just logged into the game. That they're still alive. Apparently, right there multiple different groups of people that are from the island of Flores have these stories of ape men that they claim are still around and seen on very rare occasion. They're described as something like human that walk on two legs, but are different than modern humans, and described with more ape-like features, like more hairy, but are different than the monkeys that exist on the island, like the long-tailed macaques. Locals say the ape men live in highland forests, away from humans, and have occasionally stolen crops and maybe chickens. They don't describe much else about them, nothing about their social life, culture, and they seem to be just kind of considered a nuisance to the locals, nothing more aggressive than that. And it's like, based on the way they talk about them, the interactions seem to have happened recently, not necessarily passed down as legends from generations ago. But it's impossible to say for sure. They've never been captured on camera, which I guess makes sense for isolated populations. But even with the research teams on the islands that have been there for decades, that do have the technology, they have never been documented. So are they still alive? There's no evidence, only stories that could possibly be misinterpreted. So it would be extremely unlikely, but I guess it does leave room for imagination. As we've seen countless times in science, crazy shit gets discovered a lot. Science! I tend to lean on the side of they're not alive anymore. They are very, very, very likely extinct. So if they are extinct, what happened to them? That's kind of up for debate as well, because again, the amount of evidence that exists right now is like not enough to say for sure. But there's a few different possibilities. Based on the fossil evidence, Homo floresiensis was alive between 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, ish. Honestly, there were like multiple numbers I saw at different sources, but it generally seems that the revised consensus is 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. That 50,000 years ago lines up with the arrival of modern humans to Southeast Asia. Maybe the hobbits were outcompeted by modern humans and eventually died off because they couldn't coexist. Or maybe humans killed them and it was more barbaric. There's no evidence of that at all. No evidence of the species ever interacting that we know of. So it's all speculation. It's also possible they went extinct completely on their own, maybe due to a volcanic eruption or a natural disaster. Until more fossils are found, this and many aspects of the Hobbits will remain a mystery. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my next long form video, the first episode of the History of Life series. Finally, and merch is on the way.
Yeah, man, I can't wait for the rest of them Jones, though. But y'all like watching these videos, though. But 100%, I'm trying to tell y'all, they made their character build spawn on the beach and started punching some trees to kill Oh man, I'm done. Yeah. But if y'all like the video, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what y'all want to react to next, and I'll see you on the next one.